The jabroni-beating, pie-eating, video game Acadian, and actual Canadian Dwayne Douglas Johnson. Of course also known as Flex Cabana.
Against this man, Flex Cabana, the match.
One of the most recognizable faces walking God's green earth. For wrestling fans, it feels like we grew up with the Great One throughout all his success and many, many ventures, but there's still a few things to uncover about the most electrifying man in sports entertainment. Here are 7 things you probably didn't know about The Rock. For thing number 1, let's start all the way back in his college days. You probably know that his father discouraged him from pursuing professional wrestling as a career because of wrestling's financial uncertainty. So Rock set his sights on becoming a professional football player instead. But what you might not have known is that he was also interested in pursuing a career in the CIA. Studying criminology at the University of Miami, he brought this idea to his professor, who told him his best bet would be to get a law degree, as that would make him even more useful to the agency. Of course, had the CIA known that he could layeth the smacketh down as welleth as he could, they probably would have just let him in with no degree whatsoever. But at the time, Rocky saw this as a major hurdle, knowing his grades wouldn't allow him into any self-respecting law school in the country. So he let that dream die. He did at least get to show the agency what they were missing in several blockbuster movies.
You should know one thing about me. I'm in the CIA.
Fast forwarding to his professional wrestling career, we all know that he didn't exactly have the strongest start in the business. But as The Rock started gaining momentum, 2 other wrestlers in particular started taking notice. You might have heard about the little group called The Clique, and if you haven't, then this list will definitely impress you. You may also know that despite sharing a locker room for a number of years in the WWF, HBK and The Rock never once wrestled each other. In fact, they only appeared in the ring together a small handful of times, and the closest they ever came to wrestling one another was this super kick from HBK. More on that in a moment. But what you may not know is the story behind why they never wrestled each other. It all started sometime around 1986. Seriously. The Rock was about 14 years old. WrestleMania 2 was on the horizon, and Shawn Michaels was a young lad looking to make a name for himself in the business. The Rock's grandmother was a promoter for a wrestling show in Hawaii who booked Shawn and Marty Jannetty for a show. It's unclear exactly what was said, but the story is that HBK was a dick to The Rock's grandmother, which pissed off a young people's champ. About 10 years later, when The Rock would debut in the WWF, Michaels would reportedly badmouth The Rock to anybody who would listen. Bret Hart would mention on his podcast that The Rock was a marked man backstage, and the Clique were even close to pushing The Rock out of the business altogether. Bret Hart, as well as his brother Owen, would often go to bat for The Rock, as would The Undertaker. HBK would announce his retirement in 1998, just as The Rock was becoming a household name. But HBK did make a few appearances during this retirement, including a stint as the WWF commissioner, in which he would deliver this super kick to The Rock. Legend has it, as told by The Rock's father, that this super kick landed a little heavy on the people's jaw, and The Rock confronted HBK in the locker room about it. HBK told him if he couldn't take it, to just quit the business altogether. This is in 1999, by the way. The Rock was a megastar by this point. The Rock, taking exception to this, tackled HBK and had him on the ground before the scuffle was broken up. In 2002, when HBK made his official return to the WWE, Chris Jericho talks about hearing of a storyline between The Rock and HBK being pitched to the Great One, who flat out refused to work with the showstopper. In interviews, when asked about the Heartbreaker, he often declines to comment or bluntly states his disinterest in working with HBK. And finally, bear with me, I know this is a long thing.
Phrasing?
The Season 3, Episode 8 edition of The Rock's TV series titled Young Rock also heavily implies a lot of friction between The Rock and HBK. Only they don't call him HBK. Stone Cold is Stone Cold, Triple H is Triple H, and Shawn Michaels is Chad Frost. Since his name and likeness has been altered a little bit, we can't exactly confirm that this is definitely HBK. However, the episode takes place in 1998, and the narration does actually say from The Rock himself that Chad Frost is a pseudonym for a real-life wrestler who tried to derail The Rock's career. I wonder who that could be. In the episode, the Frostbreak Kid can be seen burying The Rock behind his back before The Rock's narration eventually says, "That guy never turned out to be a friend, and I'll just leave it there." Wow, alright, there you go. That was a lot. There's more evidence. I mean, Kevin Nash basically says, "Yeah, that's Shawn," in reference to Mr. Frost, but I'm just gonna move on from here because I've already been talking for way too long. Let's go to the next thing. Speaking of wrestlers who The Rock had issues with, I bet you didn't know that The Rock hates The Big Show. Okay, not really, but you probably didn't know that The Big Show did cost The Rock thousands of dollars. In a 2020 interview with Oprah, The Rock says that when he started making money in the WWE, he eventually decided to treat himself to an expensive Rolex watch. This one. He wore it during an in-ring segment, forgetting that the segment would turn physical.
In my mind, every successful man has a Rolex watch and has diamonds in it. So I thought, this is it. I'm going to splurge. And I went and I got myself a Rolex, and I wore it in the ring, and a melee broke out, which always happens in the wild world of professional wrestling. One of the wrestlers fell on the Rolex when it came off. It broke. Live TV, and you see me, oh my gosh, my Rolex. And I'm supposed to be in the moment and wrestling these other guys. Oh no, my Rolex.
Shawn Michaels wouldn't do something like that. Or maybe he would. But as a bonus thing you didn't know, The Rock wasn't done on this evening, as this is the same show that Chris Jericho would make his Y2J debut. It's also the same show where Kane spoke his first words. Suck it. Well said, Kane. Well said. Moving on. You all know that The Rock is a movie star. I hope. So you'll also know that The Rock's first movie role was The Mummy Returns. But you might not know that this role was kind of a disaster. I mean, yes, it launched his Hollywood career, but it wasn't a great experience for the Great One. Due to Rocky's tight schedule, they were only able to get The Rock on set for a total of 3 days, which doesn't sound too bad considering his role was pretty minor, except by the time he was done getting fitted for the costumes and everything, he really only had 1 day to shoot. And on that day, he got food poisoning. Oh, and heat stroke. They were filming in the actual desert of Morocco, making him do stuff like this, which might explain the heat stroke. The Rock also claimed in a 2011 Twitter post that this was a real scorpion, which might just explain the food poisoning as well. Oh, that is definitely not a real scorpion. Rock, you liar. But this tight filming schedule also led to another problem. The Rock is meant to return at the end of the movie as a big giant scorpion, but the problem was he looks almost nothing like a big giant scorpion, so they had to do it with CGI instead. Okay, the real problem was that the visual effects team didn't have enough time to gather the much needed reference footage of The Rock that they needed to recreate him in CG. So the VFX team sorta just had to guess, which then led to what is widely considered by those that work in the industry as one of the absolute worst VFX shots in cinematic history.
Google said, hey, check this out. Here's an interesting thing you might be interested in. The worst visual effects shot in the history of ever. And I'm like, but wait, that's the Scorpion King. And I'm like, should I watch that video? I watched it. And I felt bad.
It was all kind of like the Wild West at the time. You're all figuring out how it works, let alone the best way to do it.
And I mean, I knew we needed reference, but we couldn't get it. And I thought, well, we can make it anyway.
To be fair to this guy, human faces are something that VFX studios still struggle with to this day. And this movie came out all the way back in 2001. So with that in mind, it doesn't look too bad, but a lot of articles did pick this up as being one of the worst of all time. The Rock wasn't available to provide reference for this poor guy because he had to fly to Detroit for a WWF taping, which, in my sleuthing, I deduced must have been this SmackDown taping on May 16th, 2000, in which The Rock was heavily involved in a storyline with Triple H and, somewhat ironically for this list, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. So there you go. Next thing. Alright, this is a quick one. You probably know that The Rock is half black, half Samoan, born in California but raised in Hawaii, and hailed from Miami, Florida, but is also a Canadian. His father, Rocky Johnson, was born in Nova Scotia, Canada, meaning Dwayne was eligible to receive a dual citizenship. Rocky Johnson moved to Toronto at the age of 16 to train as a boxer, in which he would spar with boxing legends George Foreman and Muhammad Ali, which is a bonus something you probably didn't know. But Rocky always had his sights on professional wrestling, and after years of traveling the independent circuit in both Canada and the United States, he would find major success in California from the 1960s to the mid-1970s, which is when the future People's Champion would come into the world. Interestingly, Rocky Johnson was still married to another woman, Una Sparks, when The Rock was born. Rock was born in 1972, and Rocky Johnson wouldn't officially divorce Una until 1978, then marrying The Rock's mother, Ata Maivia. Rocky Johnson had 2 kids with Una prior to Dwayne, and that was it for children for Rocky Johnson. Or was it? Foreshadowing. If you Google how many siblings does The Rock have, Google will say 2. They're 2 half-siblings from Johnson's first marriage to Una Sparks. That's pretty easy to find out, and you might have already known that. But what you might not know is that a 2022 Sports Illustrated article broke the news that according to verified DNA tests, Rocky Johnson has at least 5 other children with 5 other women, technically making the People's Champ one of 8 children. Rocky Johnson had almost no relationship with any of the 5 illegitimate children, as they call them. Most of these children knew who their father was long before the DNA test proved anything, which makes it all the more heartbreaking to think that these people watched their dad thank 2 of their other siblings in his Hall of Fame speech, but not them. In one case, Rocky Johnson left a note for the then 4-month pregnant Vera Pinter, stating he would see her again very soon and that he still loves her. He then signed the letter using a familiar nickname he was often referred to back then, The Rock. For our 7th and final thing, I thought we could end on a lighter note. Some of that last story got a little sour, so let's end on something chocolatey sweet. The 2005 reboot of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory received some mixed reactions. Fans of the novel often point out that Johnny Depp's portrayal doesn't quite match the source material, noting that in the novel, Willy Wonka is described as a small, thin, older man, which makes it even more bizarre to consider that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was almost cast in that role.
And you can take that to the bank.
Director Tim Burton wanted The Rock, but only if Depp wasn't available, making Rock his second choice for the film. A casting decision like this would have definitely raised a few eyebrows. But then again, for someone who's always talking about candy asses, maybe this does make sense after all. If you smell what the wonk is cooking.
That's fucking stupid.
And that's our list. Let me know in the comments if any of these things surprised you or if we need to dig a little deeper for a second installment. This has been Wrestle Lore, and we'll see you next time for more lore.